Okay, we're going to go ahead and get going. Because there's people kind of still out in the hallways, let's give a big round of applause. That brings people in. Yay! So, we would like to introduce to you our panelists, David Hancock, 9th grade core teacher, Katie Holmstead. She's been a parent organization president. She's currently on the board of trustees. She's just been one of those parents and leaders at the school who is around. She's present. She has experience, credibility. Lauri Updike, 7th grade core teacher. As she indicated yesterday, she's been in the principal approach business for decades. Also a very experienced homeschooler, so someone who also understood the value of getting this right for families that are around the world trying to implement these principles, and Nanette Wiggins, whom we just introduced. I think I'm not going to take any more time. I might just give the microphone over to you to describe process, a little bit of the background of this thing, how it started, why it's important. So I don't know which of you is going to do that, but David, here you go. Let's give them another big round of applause.
Okay, so all of you should have two documents that was part of the packet that was given to you. You should have one that's called The 7 Principles of America's Christian History, Government, and Education. And in addition, you should have the one that Dr. Erickson talked about yesterday, 7 Principles of Liberty. Okay, and this is kind of the point A, and this is about point, I don't know, hopefully it's around point V, but we're not sure yet. So we're trying to get all the way to Z, where we can finalize this. I've been asked to moderate this panel discussion, so I just want to let you all know that we want to do this truly as a discussion. If any of you have any questions at any time, you need clarification, you have further questions that you need to have answered, that you would like to have answered, please do not hesitate to not only raise your hand, but shout. As a committee, we have learned over the past, I don't know how many months, 6, 7 months, interruptions are frequent and enduring. What has happened is this process began last September when the family school brought to the curriculum committee a document which they had prepared, which they wished to use as part of the family school. And it was a very bold and daring document. It was a document that attempted to rewrite the 7 principles that have been used in the school for a number of years to be used in the family school for a younger age group. And it greatly simplified the 7 principles. As a result of that, the curriculum committee established an ad hoc committee to revise these principles in general for the school. Now, this is something that has been brought up in the curriculum committee for a number of years. I remember one of my earlier meetings some 5 years ago on that committee where the subject was first broached. At that time, Lauri Updike immediately said that if it was going to happen, she wanted to be on that committee. And now, finally, many years later, it has occurred. Now, there were a number of people on this ad hoc committee. They include Janet Erickson, Katie Holmstead, Stan Swim, Lauri Updike, Grant Beckwith, myself, Blaine Hunsaker, Nanette Wiggins, Sharnae Adams, Jane Mack, and Leland Anderson. We have met some 12 or 13 times for 2 hours at a session. We have logged some 400 man and women hours reviewing and revising and contemplating and 4R'ing very carefully on this document. We have argued about the placement of commas, the needs for articles, adjectives, adverbs, word studies. We have gone through almost all of the methodologies that we use here at American Heritage in preparing this document. And what we are here to present you is not a final version, but rather a draft. And what we would like from you are questions, comments, feelings. For those of you that have been at the school for a while or have been involved with the school, this is quite a change. I think the 7 principles of America's Christian history, government, and education might be the document that is referred to most frequently other than the mission statement. And as a result, this is really quite potentially a dramatic change for us in how we're going to go forward. All right, now, I have a list of 10 questions that we've kind of talked about and looked at, and I have some names here that we're going to throw this over to people. But the first thing that I want you to know is that this is not a final document. It is not too late to make changes. I was talking to Katie Holmstead this morning, and she said that she was really nervous, and I said, well, what's the worst they can do? They can say, we hate it. In which case, we would say, oh, okay, back to the drawing board. So, with that, what we want to do first is ask probably the most pressing question, which is, why are we doing this? Why are we rewriting the 7 principles of American Christian history, government, and education? And so to do that, I'm going to first ask Nanette to answer that, and then Katie.
Okay, I'll try to answer. Okay, I'll try to answer quickly, but for me, this is a late crop because I started thinking about a revision of these principles, I don't know, as long ago as maybe 20 years. It was when we used to go down to the little old school, and these principles were first being introduced to the teachers at American Heritage School, and Janet would give a talk on one, and Lugene would give a talk on one, and then I'd give a talk, and then Jane would give a talk, and we just kind of divided them out. And this is kind of personal for me, but at that period of time, I was becoming very familiar with other principles that were powerful to bring freedom into people's lives. I was becoming, and progress. So I was working with young women. I was a personal progress advisor. Those values were powerful. To me, they represented a powerful process that the young women of the church could go through and make progress in their lives. I served as an addiction recovery missionary for 7 years and was involved in revising or making an adaptation of the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 Steps of Recovery that bring freedom from alcoholism. And so that they were in LDSEs, easier for, more linear with the principles of the gospel. And at that same time, I became introduced to these 7 principles that bring liberty. And I started looking at all these principles and thinking, these all line up. They all line up. In fact, you can take really the first 4 principles of the gospel, and if you stretch them out and make a little chart, these principles fit. But they are for different purposes, different audiences maybe, but they all end up with freedom, with liberty, with progress, with sobriety. And so I became very interested in maybe making eventually a set of principles that would be useful in the school. But I had no, I was just a homeschool mom and at home with my own kids. So when my sister and I started working on Lessons for the Family School, we were several years into it before we decided that we needed these principles in the family school, and that really almost, if you stand back far enough, almost maybe every gospel principle that we teach can fit someplace. And so we wrote a set of lessons, not just Jane and I, but all the developers in the family school, Nancy and all of us. We wrote a set of foundation lessons for the family school. And these lessons are lessons that we want the moms to teach week 1. They're house of order, about the notebook approach. There's a lesson about the timeline. There's a lesson about how to mark your literature books. They're just basic foundational lessons. And we thought, what if there was a foundation lesson that introduced these 7 principles to the mothers right off the bat, and then we could refer to them throughout the year. So we, at that point, we went to Grant and Leland, and we asked if we could experiment with the idea of writing something that would be immediately identifiable to these women who have just been young women. They've just received their medallion. They've just come home from their missions. They have this little family. Something that they could read right off the bat that would be very much related to these principles for the foundation lesson. And then when Jane and I write the government lessons every year, in regard to a different continent, we would highlight one of these lessons and really bring it back to government. So that's kind of how this got started. Our 7 principles, where you can see they fit all on this one little page, and they're very, very gospel-oriented. Very gospel-oriented. So as we presented these to the school, there was a lot of excitement. To the leadership of the school, there was a lot of excitement about this. But for people who had grown up thinking of these as principles of liberty, they felt like the civic element was not clear, and it wasn't. And so we are so excited about this document that has come out. We don't know if we will use this exact document for the family school, but what I sat next to Jane yesterday when Janet was speaking, and I said, you know what we've done? We have 4R'd these principles, right? Because the statement of truth is the research, the principle is the reasoning, and then the application is the relating. And so I am so excited about this document. That's where it kind of got started.
I think Nanette said most of it, but I would like to add that when I was there at the curriculum committee, when you presented your first, attempt at the 7 principles and how excited I was for me as a parent and a mom. We've just finished our 12th year at the school, and I've come to Foundation several times, and every year I get a little bit more when Janet talks about the 7 principles, but still they're kind of out there for me. And I understand individuality and self-government pretty well, but after that it gets a little hard for me as a mom with the language in the 7 principles from FACE. And so the idea that there would be a document created that I, as a mother who does not have the experience of an American heritage education, could teach my children and make it easier for my children to understand these principles in the home would be a wonderful thing. Now, my son Christopher, who's on a mission and graduated from American Heritage, said, why are you changing them? Because he's learned in the classroom. He's learned from Mr. Hancock and Mr. Haymond and all others about these 7 principles, and he can articulate them better. But as a mother and a parent in my home, it's been an amazing experience to sit at this committee table and learn and be able to possibly explain these principles now in this language that we've come up with at this point.
All right. Let's go ahead and let's skip the next question, because I think we've kind of already addressed the audience that it's intended for. And let's talk about process for a minute. Lauri, do you want to just address for a minute kind of describe not only the internal process that you went through with this, but also the process that the committee went through with regards to developing the document?
The reason I said I wanted to be on this committee when it happened is because I was going to defend our principles. I remember saying to David at one point, who wanted clarification on these, I didn't say over my dead body. I said, after you've read Rosalie Slater's Teaching and Learning, then come back and we'll talk. I also remember going into David's room after our very first meeting, trying to hold back the tears. And you all know me well in that regard. And saying to him, I went into this concerned that we would lose. And after that first meeting with this committee, I came out and confessed to David, I know that we will gain. And so the process that we have pursued is to keep the attorneys separate. But we approached all of those principles in their original form. We revere those principles, and we will still include them. They are part of us. But the process was to distill the intent. We would come to the committee meeting with scripture, with dictionary, of course, Noah Webster, with the red books, to help us capture from a restored gospel perspective what the intent and the meaning of those original principles was. Face sees the American Christian founding as the ultimate link, as the ultimate event in restoring Christian education to America. That is their focus, that is their goal. We have an understanding beyond that. I remember Lou Jean Livingston, for those of you who remember Lou Jean and her devotion to children and education, saying, we need to take the gift that faith has given us and build Mount Everest upon it with that foundation. Build Mount Everest with the restored gospel. When we look at our curricula in all areas, if we place it on the foundation of the restored gospel, we have a different focus. We see the timeline differently. For instance, Faith originally put all of the patriarchs of the Old Testament together, lumped them all together. When we look at the timeline from a restored gospel dispensation and the importance and efficacy of each dispensation upon the earth, we must acknowledge each dispensation. If we're to understand the dispensation of the fullness of times, which we are living in and functioning in, we need to understand the importance of each of the preceding dispensations. That gives us a fullness of perspective on that timeline. Things in history, truths cannot culminate. The process of achieving liberty did not culminate with the American Christian founding. That was the preliminary step so that we could culminate. That process of establishing liberty in the life of a nation and each of its citizens occurred with the restoration of the gospel. So our process was to take those truths, establish the principles that play out in history. Those principles have never changed. The principles of government, and then of course those same principles that we overlay education, all needed to come to fruition in this process. We simply have labored, and that's a good word for this process. I would oftentimes dread the meetings at the end of the day when my brain was tired, and I would walk out of every single one of those meetings on cloud 9, knowing that what we were doing was crafting language that we could begin teaching from the point of language in the classroom. We didn't have to overcome vocabulary first. Now, I love the FACE vocabulary for these principles, but we had to begin in teaching. I certainly did in 7th grade. I can only imagine what it was like for our little homeschool mommies beginning to teach these principles. The vocabulary was a hurdle. And in the process of establishing a document in which the vocabulary was accessible to us as Latter-day Saints, based upon the American Christian restoration in this land, in the process of understanding, achieving, and truly offering freedom to all, That was the process, that was the intent, to capture all of that in language and in a process of a statement of truth, which is actually doctrine, but because we're not the church, it's not our place to establish doctrine. And then to establish the principles that flow from that doctrine or that truth. And, and those are all crafted in a cause to effect, because we teach governmental thinking at this school. The principles are established in a governmental thinking format, cause to effect, if then, syllogistic thinking. And then, of course, the application. And I'm so grateful that you recognize that as the 4Re process. That was our labor, to establish a document that was more us, more reflective of who we are and what we believe, with a handle that would be more usable for all of us. It is our prayer that this document, which is, as David said, a draft, we welcome input. I probably shudder at input. You know, it's like we've just given birth to a baby. Give us a few weeks.
Just to elaborate a little bit on what Lauri said, I just want you all to know that this truly was a struggle, and from struggle comes strength. There were some stupendous debates. After one meeting, Grant sent out an email saying that it took 3 lawyers to keep up with Janet Erickson. And I'm not sure that we were keeping up with her, and that was the problem. I don't think there's a single clause in this document which can be attributed to a single individual. It is truly a collective effort, and we hope that it's synergistic in that it is greater than the sum of each of the individual parts that went into it. We debated mightily. Just as one example, the Christian form of our government from the 7 principles of America's Christian history, government, and education, I think we spent 6, maybe 7, 2 or 3 entire meetings debating that over the period of time. And over the years, we have learned that principle is one of the more difficult ones to wrestle with as trying to teach it and understand it and interpret it. And we had just as much difficulty in the committee trying to understand that. And was it Janet or was it you, Nanette, yesterday or last Wednesday that said that you finally understood my point that I'd been making for 6 months? Was it Jane? Was it Jane that said that? But and you know, keep in mind that a lot of times on this committee I felt a little bit like a black sheep. I had the audacity 2 years to go in one of these foundations training to actually present on how the Christian form of our government was not an accurate principle. I remember Grant sitting in there watching me as I did this, and just anyway. So there has been debate about this and thorough discussion regarding this. All right, now at this point I want to pause before I go on to the questions that I imagine are in your minds. I would like to first see, are there any initial questions that you have about the document? Nancy.
Is the intention to completely replace the former 7 principles document?
Well, that's a good question. Katie, do you want to address? I mean, you're the board member here.
My guess is not that we would use both, but we haven't talked about that. That hasn't. As we've been drafting new language and going through this and adding the restored gospel to the language, I don't know that we would throw away the original, because that is a founding document that we've gained from FACE, and many lessons are with it. So I don't know that that is the goal. I think it would add to it.
I think that we might push it further into the background, and maybe it will just become as an archival document. Who knows? But I think our intent going in was we need something that we can use that better reflects our understanding. And so for so many years we've been interpreting the 7 principles. We have this gloss that we've put onto the document. And we felt it was time that that gloss became reality. And that's what we tried to do. Another question. I saw a hand over here.
I was just wondering whether you're faced with an article of confederation versus constitution.
You know, that's a wonderful question. Which articles of confederation are you referring to? The original articles or the ones under the Confederacy of after the Civil War? Yes, he's wondering if we're faced with an Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution of the United States. I don't know that I would characterize this in that same way. Lauri, do you want to? I think that what we're dealing with here is more of trying to reflect what the true intent or what our true understanding was of this document and has been for the last decades.
This document, the current document, is a child of the original document. It contains more instruction upon the intent, what we believe to be the intent of the original document. It's not going to go away. We can still refer to it. It can certainly still be included in notebooks and frameworks. But this document contains more instruction, more tools to help us in the teaching of the document. Can it evolve? Certainly, and we welcome your input. We found that at every single meeting, after we had pondered what we had done the previous meeting, we always came back with refinements. I'm sure there will be those of you who will want to discuss further refinements. But in terms of this being Articles of Confederation, I think as a second generation document, I think we will continue to work and refine this document rather than moving to something new.
Okay, good. Let's see, Mrs. Otteson. Somebody said she had her hand up. Up in the back.
I just wanted to applaud what you're doing because I think it is wonderful to be able to make it accessible in a way that the language is accessible to everybody. You know, and I'm starting my 11th year here, and I just appreciated yesterday when Jenna, went through it and explained it, and then seeing the language is like, okay, I received more knowledge. And granted, I haven't taken the time to study them maybe like I should have, but I appreciate that so that it's not so difficult to have it become internal.
Great. Chris.
Well, my feelings about this are, I'm very excited. I think there's something revelatory about this document. I feel it's clarity, and I think it enhances the original set of principles. The other thing, I don't think we should be afraid of change. It's like the church when they came out with the proclamation of family. Now we just reveal that to our children, and it's a document of the truth. This is surprising to me because we have evolved as a school. I have been here 10 years, and I am so excited about the diversity now that we have in this school. In one of my classrooms, I have Korean, China, just Nepal. I mean, never in 10 years would I see teach a little student from Nepal. And you nailed it right at the very first with the diversity component. Then down here where it said America's heritage, Christian character, you have given us absolute definition of what it is to be a Christian character, a person of that nature. And we can teach all of our children that come from all over the world. We are a worldwide church now, and we are a worldwide school. And I believe that this is a step forward. Definitely good job.
Change is good, but change is one of the most frightening things that we face. It takes a great deal of courage to imagine a different world than what we currently live in, and not only that different world, but to take the steps to try to make that world a reality. So again, the family school, to just applaud them for their initial effort in drafting a document which dared to challenge the 7 principles, and recognized and realized that, you know what, those principles are not really very accessible. Microphone.
Speak about Revelation. This is kind of personal too, but as Lauri walked in with this version, and Jane and I marched in with this version, I said, you know what? After that first meeting, I thought, this is going to be a very amazing experience, because I felt there are people who have passed on to whom these principles were so dear, and I could just feel, Brother Swim and H. Verlin Anderson saying, don't you forget the civil realm. And I could feel Eugene saying, don't you forget the gospel of Jesus Christ. And together, it really has come together.
Good.
It sounds really good. I appreciate it. One thing that seems to be missing a little bit is I guess because of 5th grade, we really focus on the history of the examples in history, and this is leaving out a little bit, like the character of the film. Like I know the book, the Facebook, it has those at the Boston Tea Party. It has all these examples of how to understand what happened that gives us that foundation of these principles. And I just don't want to lose that. I don't want it to not be, if the other one isn't very well, or this book isn't useful. I don't want to lose those good examples in our history.
You know, that's a wonderful comment, and we had a very protracted discussion about that. You'll notice the old document is the 7 Principles of America's Christian History, Government, and Education. The current document is the 7 Principles of Liberty. And we had some robust debates about to what extent we should or should not include those examples. Does anybody, Lauri, do you want to pick up that?
We fully intend that based upon this document, curricula will blossom. This is the foundation, and we still retain the word American in principle number 3. And it is intended that you will accomplish everything that you're concerned about, and rightly so, in curricula.
Another thing that I think, while Nanette's getting ready to answer. Go ahead. With the family school, we have become a worldwide organization. And one of the things that we're concerned about is how these 7 principles would play in China, in Germany, in Argentina, and other places of the world where the United States is not always viewed as the way that we view them, but that these principles are true and that they can be applied every bit as much as they are applied here by a student studying in China or studying in Russia or studying in France or studying somewhere else. That they don't feel like they have to betray their allegiance to their own country in order to really study and understand the principles that are being portrayed here. And I should say at least that was one of my perspectives. Nanette?
So the way we're doing it in the family school is we're introducing these principles in one of these foundation lessons. And then our hope is that in every lesson, the mother will, at the end of the lesson, help the children look back at the chart, at the principles, and choose the gospel principle, because we teach a gospel principle in every lesson, where that one best fits. And then in our government, and you know, I think this is kind of a fun idea, but we're writing one lesson on every one of these principles that's just on these principles. So this was just our original attempt for Christ-like character. We called it I'm Trying to Be Like Jesus, and it's full of examples. We used George Washington, William Bradford, Mahatma Gandhi, William Churchill, Mother Teresa, and Brigham Young. And so there will be examples. There'll be examples as you teach history. There'll be examples as you teach about botany and George Washington Carver. And there'll be examples in every subject.
Does that answer your question? Other questions?
I was wondering if in Crystal 3 about Christ-like characters, we could expand the models that are interested in to include people throughout history, not just American experience.
So in the applications?
Yes.
So you would want that to include models of Christian character found throughout history, okay? That certainly reflects some of the discussion, and there is tension in the committee regarding this issue. We have some of us on the committee that, like Linda, want to hang on to that reference to America's unique role as a leader in liberty and as a unique model of what it means to be free. But at the same time, we also recognize that there are leaders throughout the world that have emulated these same principles, if not, and other principles. Rob?
Have you considered adding any kind of references or annotations that might make this document more lend some credibility to this intended audience? Scriptures, conference talks, things like that?
We have jokingly referred to that document a number of times. I think if we did create that document, it would be a multi-volume set. You come to the meetings and there were books all over the table and pieces of paper and writings, and we'd be having a 40-minute debate, and Grant is flipping through documents and writing. He's not saying a word. He's writing. And then after we have resolved everything, and then Grant throws a monkey wrench into it by saying that after his 40 minutes of research and study, he now has this other thing that he wants to bring up. So, I mean, this, yes, we have thought about that. Maybe someday in the future.
And maybe that's what you all are. You're the living textbooks. You're the school. That's the book, right?
And in response, to, Rob, to your concern, and Bailey, this document has been written as a seedbed document. You have what you need in this document to do everything you're talking about. The foundation is there.
As a mom, I love this because I could just be in our home, memorizing these little chunks that we're trying to teach principles, and I can see my kids sitting at the table having a snack, reading this, and my kids like to read things all the time to the point where it's annoying, but I could just see them reading this and talking about it, and I could see me disciplining it and saying, remember this, and repeating these phrases, and I love this. I'm so excited, and thank you for giving us this before the summer when it's really
In the back, there. Yes.
I was a worker and I'm a county school user, and the seven principles were really hard for me because I didn't know how to those kinds of words. Using language that I'm familiar with the gospel is made so that I can see, well, that's what that meant. Because I just didn't understand. And that's just because I didn't have any teachers that taught me about liberty. I didn't have some teaching of freedom. I want my kids to feel that this is not free. That we have to work every day. We have to try to teach them. Go on stage. Someone knows what it is.
And I appreciate that comment. And we have to really thank Jane and Nanette. They were the advocates of simplicity. And then there was Janet and me that were the advocates of complexity. And I think that we have, this is like the great compromise for the Constitutional Convention. I hope that we have found compromise in places where we include words that are rich with meaning and rich with understanding, and in other places where we have simplified so that even a young kindergartner would be able to understand what we talk about. Nanette, do you want to address that? That was, and maybe Lauri, you would want to chime in on this too, because, that was really the driving force that your voice on the committee.
Well, I guess I just want these to be Limhi when he comes to his people and says, we're going to get out of bondage. And he says, he says, you've struggled before, and this is going to be a struggle, but this time it's going to be efficacious. It's going to, there's a big word for you. It's going to make a difference. And I want these principles to make a difference in the children's lives. I want them to be able to take a problem in their own lives, and I want them to be able to think, do I believe that Heavenly Father knows me and knows my problem? Do I believe that because of the atonement of Jesus Christ, He can help me? I want them to become self-governing. I want this to feel like a process for these children and for these moms. And as these moms are teaching these lessons, it's so thrilling because really, in the family school, we really are educating moms. I mean, as Jane and I edit these lessons, we never cease to thrill that there's an actual young woman, 25, 30 years old, sitting at the kitchen table learning at the same time as her children. And this process, we have to understand this process that leads to personal freedom and national freedom, civic freedom. And so if we can bring it down to their level so that they really, can relate to these principles, it's exciting. But it'll have to be done in the teaching. It can't be all done on this one document. We'd have 10 different documents, and maybe we will. Maybe we'll write something super, super simple for the family school that's more simple than this. But I don't know. As Janet spoke yesterday, the night before she spoke, I took every sentence because I didn't want so many sentences, right? And I bullet pointed them out, return, 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 return. And I thought, is that sentence important? Is that sentence important? Is that sentence important? And it was all there. They were all really important. So
I think a way to frame this is to go back to the premortal realm. The Father's plan was one of freedom, and the Savior was willing to implement that. The destroyer wanted a plan of force that he would be in charge of, and that's what this document is. It helps us in mortality understand who we are and how we maintain the liberty through our choices, the liberty to use our agency properly, to maintain freedom in the land and liberty in our hearts. This is the document that contains the principles that we hope will help us as teachers, parents, teachers, and children in the classroom. Every year, as my scholars do master project, I have them delineate each of the 7 principles in the life of their hero. I am so excited this next year to have them use our new document in doing that, because I think their understanding of the details in the life of their hero will be more pertinent, will be more broken open, more understood, and they will therefore be able to better explain how these principles work in the life of their hero, so that as they think upon that hero for hopefully the rest of their lives, they will have a better understanding of the process of using and maintaining liberty in our own lives and for our family, our church, our community, our state, our nation, the world.
All right, what are the questions? Brigham.
Thank you.
Amen.
I'm looking at the 7th principle, and I wonder if a little bit more specific restores that principle. I know that for myself, because when I encountered the 7 principles for the first time, what am I trying to say? I don't know that students will make the leap to economics and society and community and government from Principle 7 as it's currently written, and yet that can be such a rich place for growth.
I have to admit that I don't know that we spent much time on the 7th principle, because every meeting we would start, we would always go back to earlier ones and revise what we had revised. And so, our last meeting was last Wednesday, and I had to leave 10 minutes after it was scheduled to end, and so I left, and there were still discussions. Did you go another hour? Okay, yeah. This has truly been a labor of love and the sacrifice, but so I'm not really even sure what's happened with Principle 7, but thank you.
But why don't we committee right here? So if you're sitting out there and you have an idea like that, and you would like to suggest new language to the committee, we are so willing to argue about it. Right?
Discuss.
That's right. We're so willing to discuss it. So how would they go about would they turn them into who?
Well, I would say any of the people that I have mentioned that were sitting on this committee, you could give those suggestions to. Certainly the four of us, and.
Or Brigham, you could go through your department chair.
Yes, please. That's Brigham, by the way, for those of you that not inside. Anyway, so please, feedback. Let's see, we have time for a couple more comments.
So what I'm thinking as I hear comments and as I consider how I've studied before, and this was pretty much the first year that I was exposed to the Seven Principles, the original document, and there was a joy in the struggle, in coming to learn from them, much like if I can compare it to the struggle of learning from the Bible. And yet, how to look a Mormon, and that simple language was a blessing, is a blessing, continues to be a blessing. I would not have the richness in my life without both the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And I would strongly recommend that we keep hold of, use, and incorporate the original document, because there is a time and a place for the individual or the classroom to struggle a bit to understand and maybe even pull in that seventh principle and understand how it relates to economics and different things. And I also love the struggle of the scholars coming up with this principle and the effort that that takes. And so maybe not even presenting those to begin with, to allow them to be their own committees, if you will. Depending on the situation, I think there's some virtue to that as well. But to clarify, to learn as a mom, like you said, I've been a homeschool mom, and that's overwhelming. That was overwhelming to me as a man. And so I just see a lot of wisdom in the two.
Thank you. Let's see. Let's comment over here.
Levi said he likes some plainness. I think the plainness is a good thing here. But I see as a more fundamental change is the taking away of references to America. We talked about that. You mentioned that. Is that part of the decision as opposed to a principle-driven decision? And to be snarky, is it a harbinger of things to come as we take that away out of a fundamental document here? Would eventually change the meaning of the
That's an excellent question. Katie, do you want to answer that one?
I don't. I'm making comments on the side. He can hear me. That's why he said that. We will not change the name of the school, and it will always, I hope, be American Heritage. We have truly been blessed by the founders, and they're looking to the Lord to bring this nation to pass. And I don't think we were trying to remove America from this document, this new one, but we were trying to convey to the greater populace as a national sense to the world that they can have liberty, even though their countries may not have it. These are intrinsic truths and principles that are inherent to each of us, no matter where we live. And so we can look at that again. Very good question. Thank you.
I would like to address, I think, the second part of that is that I know this is not market-driven. I would say that that absolutely categorically, no, it's not market driven. But at the same time, there's a recognition that we're dealing with a larger audience than citizens of the United States of America. And keep in mind that everybody that sat on that committee are Americans, including one that came from South Africa and recently became a citizen of the United States, where her citizenship is very meaningful to her. It is not our intent, I don't believe, to in any way diminish the example of the American founding fathers with regard to these principles. In fact, with every one of these principles, we would repeatedly dig back through documents that the founding fathers had written. And that to rely upon them. However, we also recognizing that the author and the finisher of our faith is Jesus Christ. And that true freedom comes from God. The United States, the American experience has a unique place in the world as far as an example and a model of freedom and liberty. But that all stems from the agency and the freedom and the liberty that we were given as unique individuals and children of our Heavenly Father. And I think that's what we recognized. Okay, who's the spokesman up there? Rule?
You know, I was thinking of the 28th principle from the 5,000-year leap on manifest destiny. When we got Doctrine and Covenants, the principles found in the Constitution for all flesh. The last 2 years, if I had to choose students in my class that understood what it meant to be an American principles, they were not Americans. They were both Koreans. And one had joined the church in 8th grade here, not speaking hardly any English at all, yet they could articulate. Last year I had Jiho from Korea. He's now in the MTC going on a mission, but he won our history award because he understood the principles of the historical founding better than anyone in the class. He could articulate them, could argue them, could write about them. So I'm very excited about this move. You should watch these kids from China come to our class and fall in love with history again, fall in love with government, realize things that they've never ever contemplated in their lives.
Thank you. I wish we could spend another hour just discussing this. We originally were going to have some presentations on this, and the committee recommended that we have a discussion because this is something that we need to struggle with. We recognize that. We welcome your comments, criticism, suggestions. Please talk to any of us. Know that we listen with an open mind. We may not agree with you. That has happened frequently. One of the most difficult days of this process was when my hard-written proposal for Principle 5 came up for discussion for meeting after meeting. And but what has evolved from that is something that I think is good, but it is not perfect, and we have lots of room for improvement. So please give us your comments. Seek out any of the members of the committee or all of the members of the committee. Be the squeaky wheel, but please get us your comments. This is not finalized. We had hoped originally to finish it in April. Well, actually, January, and then February, and then March, and then so it is not done. We do not know when this will be finished. Yes, and I can guarantee that. One will, at least. So please seek out with your comments. But that's all the time we have for. Thank you very much.
Well, it's the process that is so beautiful, not the product. Although the product is a fruit of that process, the process truly is what teaches us and helps us to bring these principles to life for ourselves. So be a part of that process.